What if one of the most talked about villains in modern royal coverage is not a real person at all? What if the demanding diva, the difficult duchess, the woman who is always angry and never satisfied, is not a documentary portrait, but a character built out of old stereotypes and repeated until it feels true? When you step back from the noise and really look at the headlines about Meghan Markle, you do not see a monster. You see a pattern, a set of choices. In this video, we are going to ask a simple question. How was that villain built? Welcome to Royally Misrepresented, your calm space for context and facts. Here we slow down, look closely at the evidence, and separate what we can see from what we are simply being told to feel. If you are tired of outrage and still want to understand, you are in the right place. Today we are looking at what I am calling the diva deception, how a series of racially loaded stereotypes and tabloid habits combined to create a Meghan Markle villain. Not by accident, but through repeated framing that turned an individual into a ready-made character. We will look at three things. First, the double standards that shaped the early coverage. Second, the way labels like diva, difficult, and demanding tapped into the long history of the angry black woman stereotype. Third, the business model that rewarded the most hostile version of her image. The goal here is not to declare Meghan perfect. It is to ask how much of the person you think you know has been filtered, coded, and repackaged before it ever reached you. Why does this matter? It matters for Meghan, as a real human being whose reputation and mental health have been affected by years of hostile coverage. It matters for other black women and women of color who recognize the pattern from their own workplaces and communities. And it matters for all of us because once you can see how a villain is built in one case, you can begin to see the same techniques elsewhere. This is not only a royal story, it is a story about how modern media uses race, gender, and emotion to keep our attention and keep the clicks flowing. It is also a story about responsibility. Once we know a narrative is shaped by stereotypes, what do we do with that knowledge? With that in mind, let us start at the beginning. 1. The slow construction of a villain. The campaign against Meghan did not begin with the word diva. It began with framing her as an outsider. In late 2016, shortly after news of her relationship with Prince Harry became public, a Mail online article described her as almost straight outta Compton and focused heavily on crime in the area around her mother's home. Commentators have since pointed out that this language suggested a background of gangs and danger and carried clear racial undertones. Within days, Kensington Palace issued an unusual public statement on Harry's behalf. It condemned the racial undertones of some coverage and a wave of abuse and harassment directed at Meghan and her family. That was a rare moment when the palace itself acknowledged that something about the tone of the coverage had crossed a line. From there, the picture that built up around her was not one single article, but 1,000 small choices. One of the clearest ways to see it is to look at how she was compared to Catherine, Princess of Wales. BuzzFeed and other outlets collected pairs of headlines. One article praised Catherine for gently cradling her baby bump as a sign of maternal warmth, while another criticized Meghan for constantly touching her stomach and called it a showy photo opportunity. Another set praised an avocado given to Catherine as a kind gift to help with morning sickness, while a separate story linked Meghan's love of avocados to drought, conflict, and environmental harm. Yet another praised Catherine's wedding flowers, while a different piece claimed that Meghan's choice of the same flower could have put a young bridesmaid at risk. Each individual headline can be dismissed as just one angle or one style of writing. Together they reveal a pattern. Same action, different meaning, depending on who is doing it. Warm when Catherine does it. Selfish, vain, or careless when Meghan does it. 2. The stereotype underneath the labels diva, difficult and demanding, might sound like ordinary criticism, but they sit on top of something deeper. The long-standing trope of the angry black woman. This stereotype portrays black women as aggressive, hostile, and hard to please. It punishes them for expressing strong feelings or setting boundaries, and it can have serious effects on everything from healthcare to employment. Scholars who study media coverage of black women note that this trope is often activated even when race is not mentioned directly. Tone, facial expressions, and word choice all become part of the code. In the case of Meghan, it is not only critics and commentators who have noticed this. She herself devoted an episode of her podcast Archetypes to the angry black woman stereotype. Speaking with Issa Rae and Zeal, she described how she found herself cowering and tiptoeing into rooms because she was afraid that any firm statement might be read as proof that she was difficult. She talked about the difference between being demanding and being clear, and how the fear of the label can shape your behavior before you even say a word. Issa Rae, who has her own long experience of working in entertainment, spoke about how black women are often advised to accept being called particular as a kind of compromise. The message beneath that advice is simple. Your standards will be seen as a problem. You have to walk a narrower line than others. When you place those conversations next to the way Meghan has been described, the overlap is hard to ignore. Stories about her often focused on moments where she appeared serious, then read a whole personality into a single expression. When she raised concerns about how she was treated, some outlets framed her not as someone describing a painful experience, but as an ungrateful complainer. 3. The economy of outrage. The final piece of this puzzle is money. There is a reason the Meghan villain story lasted so long. It was profitable. On social media, analysis by Bot Sentinel, a firm that studies targeted harassment, found that a relatively small network of accounts was responsible for the majority of abusive content about Meghan and Harry on Twitter. In one report, they identified 83 accounts whose posts and reposts accounted for around 70% of the hate-filled material in a sample of more than 100,000 tweets, reaching an estimated 17 million users. Later reports from the same group described a cottage industry on YouTube in which channels dedicated almost entirely to attacking Meghan and Harry had generated hundreds of millions of views and several $1 million in estimated advertising revenue. Commentators called it a hate-for-profit enterprise in which racism and ad money were major motivators. So where does that leave us as viewers and readers? We cannot undo every headline. We cannot log off the internet for Meghan or for anyone else. What we can do is start asking better questions about the stories we consume. When you see her described as a diva or difficult, what is the behavior actually being described? Would it be framed in the same way if a white woman did it? When a story makes you feel a sudden rush of anger or contempt, who benefits from that feeling? Is it helping you understand anything, or just keeping you clicking? I would like to hear your thoughts. When did you first notice that the coverage of Meghan felt different? Was there a headline or a moment that made you stop and question the narrative? Share your reflections in the comments and please keep them respectful. This channel exists for people who are willing to think slowly in a media culture that often rewards rushing to judgment. If this deep dive gave you something to think about, you can support Royally Misrepresented by liking this video, subscribing, or sharing it with someone who is starting to question the headlines they see. The more of us refuse to accept ready-made villains, the harder it becomes for old stereotypes to pass as simple truth. Thank you for spending this time here, for your attention, and for your willingness to sit with nuance. Take care of yourself and of the people around you. Until next time.